The dream of homeownership still eludes many Black Americans. We're reminded of the racial divide this weekend in particular. It's the 100th anniversary of the massacre of Black Americans in Tulsa. The thriving neighborhood known as Black Wall Street was destroyed by a white mob. The murderous riot started on May 31, 1921, killing hundreds in crimes that were never prosecuted. The attacks also devastated the economic momentum created by the city's Black residents. Today, a half-century after the civil rights movement tried to erase decades of government-sponsored racism in the home-buying system, Black families are still far less likely to own their homes. And those who do own tend to live in homes worth far less than others. Nationally, 42% of Black households live in a home they own compared with 72% of white households, according to Zillow's compilation of 2019 census data, the latest data available. 5 of 6 California metropolitan areas studied have ownership rates below the national norm, and the racial gaps were larger than the U.S. spread in 4 of those regions. Let's also note that Tulsa's Black ownership rate is 39% versus 71% for whites. Incomes, credit histories, education and career choices contribute to this shortfall. But we cannot overlook housing's historically racist legacy that includes banning Blacks from owning in certain neighborhoods and a lending process that still isn't fair to many minorities. Such economic divides only add to a persistent racial wealth gap, fueling tensions that were a factor in civil unrest seen across the nation in the pandemic era. The issues caused by historic discrimination won't be solved quickly, but addressing things like increasing access to credit, more equitable lending standards and reducing exclusionary zoning could make buying more accessible and bring significant strides toward closing the wealth gap, Zillow economist Trey Manhertz says. The problems run deep and perpetuate inequality, he says. Intentional, targeted and dedicated policy is necessary to repair this broken system. Ownership gaps are not uniform across the nation. My trusty spreadsheet, filled with Zillow's analysis of 49 big metro areas, plus Tulsa, found the largest racial homeownership gap was in Minneapolis, the flashpoint for last year's racial unrest after George Floyd was killed under the knee of a police officer. In Minneapolis, 25.6% of Blacks lived in homes they owned, lowest among these 50 metros, compared with 76.4% for whites. The next widest gap was in Milwaukee, where 26.7% of Blacks owned, second lowest level, versus 71% for whites, no. 33. Then came Pittsburgh, where 31.4% of Blacks owned, eighth lowest, versus 73.22. The smallest gap was in Washington, D.C., with 50.6% Black ownership, highest in the nation, versus 72.4% for whites, no. 24. Next was the Los Angeles-Orange County Metro, a tough place for anybody to own. Black ownership is 34.6%, 12th lowest, while it's 56.